Greetings, booktubers, and welcome back to Grammaticus Books. Today we're getting back to our normal fare. We're getting back to talking about books, which makes me very happy. And today we're talking about the best book of 2023. So a couple of videos ago, I did a video on the worst book of 2023. And in the comments section, Smiler wrote, "Hey, Grammaticus, if you're going to do the worst book of 2023, then you should do the best book of 2023. And I think that was a great suggestion by Smiler. So here we are today doing the best book of 2023. And by a stroke of good luck and providence, I just happened to finish last week the best book that I've read in 2023. And that book is Bram Stoker's Dracula, which has been a book that just gets all kinds of props on BookTube. And I know one booktuber in particular who it's one of his favorite books, if not his favorite book of all time. So I figured I better check it out. So I did. I'll put it up over here. I did the unabridged audio version by Naxos Audiobooks, which is a complete production of Bram Stoker's Dracula with 8 voice actors, 8 English voice actors taking the parts of all the major characters. And it was absolutely fantastic. So Dracula is written by Bram Stoker. It's published in 1897. Bram Stoker is an Irish author who was writing Victorian gothic horror stories in England. And this one just really gripped the public's imagination, and it took off from there, spread across England, and then out from England and across most of the world. And the influence of this book has just been immense. It's difficult to overstate the influence that this book has had on fiction in general and the horror genre in particular. Even just this year, there were 2 movies released by Hollywood dealing with Dracula. You had Renfield, which came out, and then you had the movie Demeter about the ship that Dracula takes over to England that also came out this year. You've got the Twilight Saga, the Vampire Diaries, countless movies about Dracula that come out, and just hordes of books that are all related to vampires. Its influence has just been immense. You can't hardly overstate its influence. And that's well deserved because this book is fantastic. I'd held off reading it for a long time because I had 2 fears about reading this book. And my first fear was that it was just going to be this long, rambling, semi-directionalist Victorian novel that was going to have just a ton of navel-gazing in it. And then my second fear was that having seen all these movies about Dracula, and some of these movies follow the book very closely, that would take a little bit off the top of the book, off of the novel, take a little bit of the punch out of it. And I'm happy to report that the first fear about it being a long, rambling Victorian introspection was completely unfounded. It's very well written, exceptionally well written. In fact, I would say it's written with a style of grace and intelligence that unfortunately is all too uncommon these days. It's just a beautifully written book. And then the second one, maybe a little bit with the movies. If I'd never seen Dracula before, if I didn't know anything about it and I picked up Bram Stoker's Dracula, I mean, that would just blow your mind about all these myths and legends of the vampires that he's brought together and put into this novel that came out in 1897. It's just amazing. It's fantastic. And if I hadn't seen all those movies, it really would have just put this book over the top as one of the greatest books of all time for me. And it was still excellent. It took a little bit off of it, but not a lot, because the book goes into a ton more depth in a lot of the scenes than the movies ever could. And I'll go into that here in a little bit. And by the way, there will be spoilers in this review. So if you haven't read Bram Stoker's Dracula, just be warned, there are some spoilers coming up. Stoker publishes this in 1897, but it's not the first book to be published about vampires. And I say book, but really there were some short stories that came out prior to Stoker's novel, earlier than that by a couple of decades at least. But they were very, very short, almost so short to be called vignettes rather than short stories. And to my knowledge, Stoker is the first person to take all of this material and then put it together into a novel and then craft it so well that it's held up for, 126 years now. And as an example of just how well written this book is, I'll take the first opening episodes of it. So you've got Jonathan Harker, who is a solicitor from England, who's going over to Dracula's castle, who thinks is just this lord, this eccentric lord in Transylvania, to explain to him about his purchases that Dracula's made in London. And this is all done through the diary of John Harker, and you're going day by day through his diary. And it starts off as sort of a tourism novel of Transylvania. And you get this inkling that things might not be right when the peasants start reacting oddly when they hear that he's headed to Dracula's castle. And then he arrives at Dracula's castle and things start to get very strange. And then he's in Dracula's castle and Bram Stoker just slowly turns the horror heat knob up on the stovetop and just gets it going a little bit and then just keeps turning it and turning it and turning it until eventually he brings it to a boil. And Jonathan Harker in his novel has now realized that he's gone from an eccentric lord that he's there working with, that, you know, he might be stuck there for a bit, to that he's a prisoner, to that he's probably not going to get out alive. And then beyond that, that he may not even get out with his soul intact. And there's a scene in the castle where the brides of Dracula find John Harker in this room, and they filter in through the moonlight and then materialize in the room, and they start to seduce him in order to drink his life's blood. And Dracula comes in, stops them before they can drain the life out of Jonathan Harker. And then in order to sate their thirst, which is now unslaked because they couldn't kill Jonathan Harker, he hands them a baby that he has kidnapped from the local village. And at this point, the horror level has just gone over the top. And it's a wonderfully done scene. It's a beautiful scene. It gets repeated in almost all these movies. But the movies don't do it justice the way that Bram Stoker does. And it's at this point that Jonathan Harker realizes, I have to get out of here. Even if it kills me, I have to get out of here. Because even if I die a normal death, at least before these bloodsuckers drain my life out of me, at least then my soul's intact. And so he concocts this very daring escape scheme to climb down the outside of the castle, and he's successful. And at that point, he goes back with his betrothed, who is Mina Murray, and they go back to England. But then Dracula follows them to England, and they're all in London. And in London, Dracula then targets the best friend of Mina Murray, who is Lucy Westenra, and he starts slowly draining the life out of her. And there's a doctor who had been courting Lucy Westenra by the name of John Seward, and John Seward also runs the sanatorium in London. And he's baffled, so he pulls in his buddy Van Helsing, and then together, all of them start to try to put together the puzzle of what is slowly sapping the life out of Lucy Westenra. And Van Helsing comes to the conclusion that he thinks it's a vampire. And then they come up with a means to combat it, and they're trying to bring her back to life. But from a series of, or a combination of events, I should say, of not being fully aware of the true nature of the threat that they're facing at that time, and through the bumbling and good intention, but interferences of other people who come in to sort of throw monkey wrenches into their plans and their workings and try to protect Lucy, they fail and Lucy dies. So Lucy dies, she becomes an undead vampire, and then she starts preying upon the children of London. And it's at this point that you realize just how far things can go. Because after Dracula takes Lucy and turns her into one of his brides, he then starts going after Mina Murray, Jonathan Harker's betrothed wife. And the whole purpose of Lucy in the book is to show you the stakes. Because now that you've seen what can happen to Lucy, you understand fully what could potentially happen to Mina. And that's her role in the book, is to show you just how bad and how evil things can get. And it's done just brilliantly. I know a lot of people complain that that part of the book kind of stretches out a little bit too much. There's all these blood transfusions and these steps they take, and Lucy's mother gets involved into it. But I thought it was really well done. I liked it. I didn't mind it at all, because it builds up the book and it lets you know, okay, this is what could potentially happen to Mina and the rest of the population of London, because that's Dracula's plan, is to turn London into a vampire city and then eventually England into a vampire nation. Let me get a drink of Coke here. So at this point, Jonathan, Mina, John Seward, and Van Helsing, and the suitors of Lucy Westenra are fully aware of what's happened with her death. And they've begun a hunt in order to hunt Dracula through the city. And it becomes sort of this detective horror novel at that point. that's very interesting. I loved it as they're tracking him through the city. And they drive Dracula out of London because they've tracked him down and destroyed almost all of his coffins of dirt that he brought over from Transylvania. And they're pursuing him back into Europe, back into Eastern Europe, and trying to stop him before he can get back to Castle Dracula, because that's his plan, is he wants to get to Castle Dracula where he can entrench himself, put all of his defenses around him, and then go to sleep for 100 years. Because he's immortal, and he can sleep for 100 years, and his pursuers, Van Helsing, Jonathan Harker, and the others, being mortals, will die, and then he can just come back out of the grave, go back over to England, and start up all over again. And you get this chase scene across Europe as Mina is slowly getting weaker and weaker because Dracula's been able to get to her. But she's such a paragon of womanhood, she's so strong, that unlike Lucy, she's able to resist going down that route into the undead long enough that they're able to stop Dracula before he gets to the castle. And this is where I have, I think, my one complaint about the book, and this might be tied to the movies. And I'll explain in that it ends very abruptly. And in all the movies, you get this final confrontation between Van Helsing, Jonathan Harker, and some of the other members of this group, and Dracula. And you don't get that in the book. You don't really get that final confrontation, that final battle. And I think if I hadn't seen the movies, I might not feel that way as much, but it did seem to end rather abruptly. And I'm going to add one other thing to it that I really enjoyed in the book that you don't get in the movies. And that's the character of Renfield. So John Seward, one of the suitors of Lucy Westenra, is also running the sanatorium in London, and one of his patients is Renfield. And Renfield is a follower of Dracula, and they're figuring this out slowly. And he's in the cell in the sanatorium, and he keeps eating insects. And in the movies, that's basically all you get, that he's this crazy follower of Dracula who likes to eat bugs. But in the book, they go far more into the psychology of Renfield. They're trying to diagnose him and figure out, what his psychosis is and how it's manifesting itself. And Renfield is trying to become like a Dracula. So he eats flies, and then he grows up to spiders. And then from there, he goes to birds. And then he tries to get Seward to give him a cat. And eventually, he's trying to work his way up to a human being. And his character, I think, is really great. I really enjoyed how they went into the depth of studying his mental illness. And at the end of it, Renfield actually redeems himself. Dracula's coming to him. He's trying to get him to help him to take Mina as another one of his brides. And Renfield redeems himself, and that he sees what a great person, what a paragon of womanhood, as I said, that Mina is. And he decides that he can't let Dracula take her. And he actually gets into a physical confrontation with Dracula to try to stop him. And Dracula winds up killing him, breaks his back. And then he dies there in the sanatorium. So it's a different ending in the book for Renfield, and it's a very far different development of his character, and it's far superior than what you get in the movies. And that's why I really love this book, and this is why I've got to call this book the best book of 2023. But I read another book in addition to this one. I read Dracula, the Prince of Many Faces, and I'll put it up here as well. And this was a historical novel about the real Vlad Dracula and his father, Vlad Dracul. And Dracul just means dragon in Transylvanian. And it was an order that was bestowed upon Dracula's father for being a hero and a protector of Christianity, because they were positioned on the border of the Turkish Empire. And the Turkish Empire kept invading and trying to take over Transylvania, Wallachia, and the other countries around it, so they could drive on then into Western Europe and conquer Western Europe and make it part of the Islamic Turkish Empire. And Vlad Dracul and his son Vlad Dracula were instrumental in stopping the Turks. And this book is great. It's super well researched. It goes into all the detail about the family and all the political interactions and how that they were using their troops and their strategies in order to stop and frustrate the Turks. And they absolutely did. Without Vlad and his son Dracula, the history of Europe might have been very different. But another thing that comes through in this book is that the real Vlad Dracula was a far larger monster than Bram Stoker's Dracula ever was. Hands down, it's not even a contest. The real Vlad was a terrible person. And he was a monster in the truest sense of the word. He would kill people in the most horrible ways imaginable. He would take pregnant women and then would open up their bellies while they were still alive, vivisect them, and then tear out the babies and kill them. He would impale people left and right. He would behead them. He would come up with all these ways to just murder people by the most gruesome ways possible. And he did this on a scale upon tens of thousands of his own people. I mean, he was a true monster. But he's kind of a complicated guy because without him, the history of Western Europe might have been vastly different. So this book here, the Dracula, the Prince of Many Faces, it's very good. If you're interested in the actual history of the Draculas, of Vlad Dracul and Dracula, I highly recommend it. The research, the level of research that went into this book is spectacular. You'll really enjoy it. So those are two books that I enjoyed, that I read. And what I'm currently working on is I've got Jules Verne, Journey to the Center of the Earth. I read like a young adult version of this when I was about 10 years old. There's a nice little cover on this one, and I'm about halfway through it, so I'm working on that. And I've finished 2 more stories in the Thor Omnibus number 2, The Wrath of Odin. I finished Thor and the Destroyer, which I think is the first combat between Thor and the Destroyer. Actually, the Destroyer does come into this book earlier, and Loki reanimates the Destroyer in this story. It's a really good one. And then this, actually, I do think, though, is the first appearance of Ulik, was the second one. And there you got Ulik on the cover. And Ulik is one of my favorite Thor villains of all time. So I just finished that one. It's a 2-parter, and I'm getting ready for the second one. And I still got at least 100 pages to go in this omnibus. And then when I finish this omnibus, I'll do a complete review on it. But that's about it. I'm already late getting this video up. I already shot this video once. I shot it very late last night, Friday night. Today is Saturday. I'll try to get this posted by about 6 o'clock today, Saturday. And when I rewatched my video from late last night, I just came to the conclusion it was a learning lesson. Grammaticus, don't shoot videos late at night. You say silly things. So this is my second shot of it. I'll get this one posted up here. And with that, I'm going to stop rambling and say take care, be safe, and I'll catch you guys in the future.